I mean, I've dealt with all different kinds of clients from, I mean, I've dealt with startups that had no money. I've dealt with startups that have lots of money. I've dealt with billionaires that operate at a totally different, level than
Mhm.
logic would dictate. I've dealt with everything in between, right? Um, you just need someone who's dedicated to the business. That like as
Yeah.
long as the founder, like I want to know that whoever hires us is actually working in the business. I don't care if they're doing it full time. I just care that they're involved enough that I can be useful and I can actually fix the thing where it's not hard to get a hold of them and they're not totally out of touch with reality, like they just have to be dedicated to it.
Mhm.
You can say you want to fix it.
Welcome to Leadership Disrupted. My guest today built his career selling something that everybody wears, or let's say almost everybody wears, and almost nobody talks about: underwear. Michael Kleinman started Fresh Pair out of a New York apartment in 2001, back when buying your basics online sounded slightly unhinged. And he turned it into a category leader. Then he did it again with Underwear Expert. But here's why Michael's on the show today. He spent 2 decades selling directly to real people, which means he's had a front row seat to every disruption we keep circling on this podcast. The the information overload, the noise, the misinformation, the collapse of trust, the cynicism that makes people tune everything out. When you sell direct to consumers, you feel all of that in numbers in real time, and there's no place to hide. Michael is not a theorist. He does the work end to end: product, tech, marketing, logistics. And he knows what actually cuts through when everyone's exhausted and nobody's paying attention and nobody believes the pitch. How do you connect with consumers and drive them to some form of action? So, Michael, first of all, welcome to Leadership Disrupted. I'm excited to have this conversation today. Um, what more would you share about your own background, just to fill in the gaps a bit before we dive into the conversation?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and your synopsis of my background was great. So there aren't many gaps, but essentially, in my early 20s, I started at this underwear company and had no idea what I was doing. All I knew is that I knew more than the people that were currently working there, and I wound up taking over and turning into a huge company. Mid eight-figure revenue, and nothing. I mean, it was started in my apartment, on my couch. So that was very fun. We sold 30. By the time I left, we had 30,000 SKUs in
Wow.
that we sold in inventory. Um, we had 50 people in an office in New York City. We had a warehouse in Texas, and I learned so much, and mostly because I had a job in the company at some point, and that's how I
Mhm.
was able to run the company, scale the company by really understanding what people did. Because I think with a lot of companies, you get a CEO that has never actually done anything, and they don't understand what the departments actually do. Um, so I always wanted to run things differently. And then fast forward, after that exit, I started Underwear Expert, which was much more focused, only men's underwear, subscription e-commerce. I thought it would be easy. I learned that subscription e-commerce is an order of magnitude more difficult than traditional B2C,
Uh-huh.
but it's also fun. And so I still have Underwear Expert as a company, and I have another company which I'm really really excited about, and it's my D2C consulting company. So we take everything I've learned in the last 25 years, and I have a team that supports me, and we go in and we work with different D2C companies and fix problems, and we have a lot of success with everything we do.
So, how does that process start? Let's assume for a moment I have a direct-to-consumer company. I have a particular product or service,
Mhm.
and I'm interested in getting more traction, just getting more growth out of whatever it might be. How does that process start with you as a consultant?
So we're not a marketing agency, and I don't really ever want to be a marketing agency, but I believe that in order to have successful marketing, you need to have a really solid foundation. So what we do is we fix the foundation. That way we can unlock all of these things that happen once the company is running correctly. And in many cases, we help manage the marketing agency. We come up with creative ideas. It really depends on the level of engagement and where they want us. Uh, but I think people typically find me through word of mouth, or contacts I already have. I don't do any advertising, and 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 people typically come to me with like, "Hey, Mike, I have this problem. What do you think?" And then if it's something we can help with, we help. And yeah, it's usually operational.
Can you give me an example of when you say it's usually operational, meaning
Yeah.
are you saying it's part of their like internal processes that aren't aligned well,
Yeah.
or
Yeah, well, sorry, sometimes I'm vague.
no, it's
Um,
okay.
people will come to me and say, usually it's a founder. A founder will come to me that I've known
Mhm.
for a while, and they'll say, Michael, my business is stuck at doing $5 million. It's been at that level for 3 years. We can't figure it out. We're doing this, and this, and so they'll come to me, and then usually revenue is not where they want it to be. That's usually the thing that is the issue. And then once we start talking, they know what some of the problems are, but they just don't know how to solve them. They have a bunch of people that have been there for a while. They think they need to change the people. They're not really sure. They have a lot of systems in place. They're probably legacy things that need to be reevaluated and modernized. It's all D2C, so there's a mostly Shopify website. They probably have some issues that someone has never, identified. So usually it's, revenue is not where it needs to be, or they're starting to lose money, right? And
Mhm.
something's wrong in the P&L. So usually it's a P&L issue or a top line revenue issue or both. And then I have to come in and try to figure out how do we fix everything. And so we start fixing the foundation, because you could spend all the advertising dollars you want in the world. If your foundation is broken, you're just going to keep losing money.
And
So
I
that's what we do.
imagine it doesn't take much for a consumer to move on. So whether it's
Not at
something
all.
in the ordering system, something in the customer experience online. Uh, can you give us maybe a couple of examples of how companies like unintentionally are making errors? It seems like they're doing everything right, but in reality, they're causing customers to go away just because they're either losing them. Well, for whatever reason, you tell me.
Yeah, look, I mean, we all know that Amazon has trained everyone to kind of operate, differently. So customers and brands operate differently because there are, different thresholds now for expectations than there were previously, which I think is good, right? That
Yeah.
you should get it faster. It should be more accurate. It should be easier to deal with when you have a problem. But have been around for a while, they've been doing things the way they've always done things, and they have so many different legacy things in place. I had a client, and the largest department at that client was their accounting department, right? They're a D2C company. The largest department should be marketing. And they had just been in business for more than a decade. They had a lot of manual processes, systems that made absolutely no sense, software that wasn't even made anymore. And it was such a manual thing. I mean, they also have not discovered Claude or any AI tools, but they were operating 19. They were running a popular website that does like a lot of revenue. So and we had a client, that had, and I've talked about this a lot. We had a client that had a very, very high number of issues with that had a very high complaint rate, and their product ratings were really low. So we came in, and long story short, the sizing was wrong on all of the garments, size charts were wrong on all the garments, and they sold products in different countries, and in different countries the sizing fluctuates a little bit. A small in the United States is not necessarily a small in another country, and especially larger sizes. So so we go in and try to uncover the things that are like the hardest things that they've never been able to solve. When you go to Amazon and you know, company rating is a 4.0 website, and you look at the ratings and you're in the low fours, most brands don't do anything about it, right? Or they read the comments, they go to the customer service, but it's very hard to move the needle. So, you know, we'll come in and, you know, really like dissect it and tell you exactly what needs to happen. And I have a ton of other examples if you need something more concrete than that.
Well, I just know that for me, Amazon has trained me that I should be able to get what I want, pretty much what I wanted at a price that feels great. You know, the days of saying, hey, you can either get it fast or cheap or high quality, but you can't get all three. I think those days are done. Amazon says, no, you can get it fast, and you can get it at a very reasonable price, and the quality is going to be pretty darn good. And so we've been trained to expect more. And
I want something in my house before I even ordered it, right? I want them to just send it. I don't even care. But one of the things that we do with a lot of brands have, there's a lot of friction around freight. Like you mentioned, shipping, speed, and things like that. If you're not, you know, in Amazon FBA and you have your own 3PL that's shipping your orders, there's a huge range of options for shipping, right? And if you're dealing with something like underwear or something that has a lower average order size, you know, you have less options, and it becomes business critical to get them right, because you know, freight is a very big expense, right? You can make little tiny errors that cost a huge amount of money that are compounded over the, you know, tens of thousands of transactions per month. So one of the things we do is we do these freight audits and these fulfillment audits that really look at what the warehouse is really costing and what the freight is really costing, and where do you optimize. A lot of clients of ours, they think they have it optimized, but even if I can squeeze out 1% savings, it adds up to a lot. We had a client where, like, in the first year, I saved them a few $100,000 just by reconfiguring freight logic, and they thought they were doing it the right way, but you know, when you look at the data, sometimes it just tells a different story. So we go in. You know, someone asked me, like, what is the impact of the things that you do? How do I distill that? And after having a bunch of clients with similar issues, I think go in and we fix the gross profit, right? Because the gross profit is made up of all the problems that you have, warehouse issues, freight issues, returns, like whatever the issues are, you really do see that in your gross profit. I mean, we can help with expenses too, obviously, by optimizing, but if we're fixing the foundation of the business, that's really, you know, you explore that in the gross profit.
Well, it sounds like, you know, I know you've referred to yourself as like a fractional chief operating officer, but it seems almost as if you're a fractional COO, CMO, CEO, who also that is on the ground, and I think is there in the weeds, in the trenches, looking at what is really happening on the ground, not making any assumptions at all. And oftentimes I would imagine that's where the magic is. That's where the change is really understanding what is truly happening in order processing, what's truly happening in terms of the customer experience, as opposed to, I think, many CEOs, once your business, you know, moves beyond that $3 to $5 million level, you drift so far away from the day-to-day reality of the business. You have to make assumptions. You have to assume I'm hiring people that I trust. I'm hiring people who understand what I'm telling them to do. And I assume, even though I haven't packed an order in 5 years, I assume the orders are being packed the way I used to pack them. Even though I haven't, there was a time in my business I did everything, just like you described yourself, did everything end to end. So I knew it. Now I've gravitated so far away. I assume, well, why, unless they've told me that things have changed, why would things have changed? But in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine in your experience, it's so easy for a business to drift because we make decisions, we change processes, we save a little bit of money here, or we change a little thing here, and then the unintended consequences as these changes accumulate oftentimes result in lower margins, lower gross sales, or lower something, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're doing $20 million or more, you're not able to know every little detail of everything that's going on. And you might when you started and you did everything yourself, but you need people and systems in place so that you don't have a situation where things drift. And I think a little bit of drift is unavoidable. But getting back to the C-level titles, I love titles and I hate titles. I was very anti-title for a while, but I think I'm more of a chief transformation officer if I had to have a title.
Mhm.
And I think I'm really all of the C titles, right? I don't go into clients as an outsourced CEO because that scares everyone.
Sure.
That's the only reason I don't use that. But I think, it's some combination of like really a strategist, right? That also has operational capabilities. So whether that's a chief operating officer, chief transformation officer, I mean, many would argue that I'm a CFO sometimes, a CEO much of the time, a CIO, but I think at the end of the day, we just fix the problems, whatever area, we usually get into all areas.
Well, and in order to fix the problems, you have to know what the problems are, and that is going to require you to be on the ground, really,
Yeah.
observing what's actually happening, not what someone thinks is happening or someone assumes is happening. How often do you engage with a business owner or a key leader, and he or she expresses what they think the issue is, and hey, we want to hire you to solve XYZ, whatever, and here's what we think is happening. So, and when you actually start to explore what's happening, you realize they are misreading the situation, or maybe they just don't understand what's actually happening on the ground. How often do you see that happening?
So, I mean, we do work with some startups. So I guess we're not really talking about them in terms of established businesses. 100% of the time, the founder will come to me and tell me what they think. Meeting number one, they want to give me the download as if I'm their like therapist almost. And it's, here's what I think is wrong. Here's what I think of all the different people. And every single one of them will say, evaluate the people and tell me what you think. Nothing's nailed down. I don't care who you replace. All I want to do is fix the problem. And, there are different levels of that, right?
Sure.
And so we kind of go through a similar thing and they tell me what they think. And then I usually come up with an initial plan based on what they think it is, because I need some. And then as I go through my plan, I start to validate what they think the issues are. I start to build out my plan. And then, that's how we wind up with, 300 tasks, in a monday.com board that need to be tackled for a client. But we usually start with like an initial verbal, simple thing.
Sure.
And it really just depends. I mean, a lot of the clients are, they're creative people. They had an idea, they started a business, but they're not CEOs. And in order to get a business to a certain level, you have to remove the emotion and run it like a business. And a lot of people just don't do that. So they might be lucky and get it to a certain point, and then they have to bring in professional management, or they might be lucky and get it to a certain point and money's not an issue for whatever reason. So they can just run it like a lifestyle company. I've seen just about everything that you could imagine in terms of professionally run hobbies that turned into things, it's very interesting. But at the end of the day, we take what the founder, CEO thinks the issue is. we try to validate it, and then we try to fix it. And I had a client where they came in and they said, someone I had known for a long time, they came and they said, fix the business. A bunch of marketing agencies, I don't know if they're doing the thing. The business has been stagnant. And, see what the people are doing, and I don't care who you fire. And I had this whole conversation. So we came up with a plan. And my plan was to, evaluate the warehouses, evaluate the agencies, evaluate the people. And I started doing those things. And then I realized that the CEO is right. I mean, the agencies were completely incompetent, but everything of the company was broke. There wasn't a single thing that actually worked well. But how do you tell a client that's been running a business for 15 years that 100% of everything is broken? So
when in fact he or she was at the core of hiring most of those people, making most of those decisions, bringing those agencies on board. So, so let me ask you this: how does a business drift so far off track? I mean, you would think a CEO, as any of those things start to drift off track, he or she would take action on those things in real time. How does it happen?
I mean, I think another one of my titles could be business therapist, because when you're dealing with founder-run companies, a lot of your problems come back to the founder themselves, and then you have to dig into the emotions around the decisions they're making, why they're doing certain things, and compounded over many years without someone to tell them no. That's how you wind up with a huge cluster of problems that you really can't solve. It's very interesting. I think when you have a founder-run company and they've been running for a while and they have a really large amount of things, the first thing you have to do is establish trust, right? Because you need them to hand over the keys so you can do it. You don't want them to approve every change. You don't want them in everything, because they're the ones that got this screwed up. So you have to establish trust, and quickly, and to start moving the needle on things. And once you start moving the needle, more trust is established, and then they kind of back off a little bit. It's very interesting. It's very challenging, and but it's fun. I like seeing, the results of something. Like, give me a really screwed up situation, let me fix it. That's satisfying.
Well, there's this classic pattern, and I hear it over and over again, not just in direct-to-consumer companies, but in broadly in leadership in general. Either a founder or a leader, starts to their leadership career begins to accelerate. They move up the corporate ladder. They become a functional leader of a division or a department or business unit. Then they move up, into the executive suite and they don't realize over time that with every move up the ladder, there's a bubble around them that starts to form, and they get less and less authentic information from people. People are more careful with what they share with them. People are more careful with sharing bad news, or sharing what's not working, or why something's not working, and that effect can compound over time, so that over the years you end up with a CEO or other senior leader who is probably incredibly smart. They would have to be in order to reach the level that they've reached, and is very capable, but their lack of exposure to the real world of the business starts to really degrade their judgment and degrade their ability to make things happen. And suddenly they start to feel, because of the results, usually they have this uncomfortable feeling that something's not working, something's not right. We can't seem to grow past 20 million, or we can't seem to get past whatever the limits might be. And I swap people out, and I make what I think are hard choices, and we still keep coming up against a particular wall. I can see why bringing in a new set of eyes can actually be a really smart decision for somebody, because once that bubble starts to form, it's hard to break it down. You're not going to have people who will just, just because you ask, they're going to feel comfortable coming to you, sharing difficult news or sharing the reality of what's going on. So I imagine a new person with a mindset of digging into the weeds, identifying what's really happening, that can be a valuable set of eyes and a valuable
Mhm.
new perspective for a senior leader in whatever position they might be in. Um, when you say leadership therapy sessions, what kind of angst or anxiety is common, or do you commonly experience when you start having these conversations about what's working, what's not working within their business?
Yeah, I think as a company gets bigger, you need professional management, and by definition, they may not be really tuned in to everything that's
Mhm.
on the ground. Um, but I know when I had 50 employees, um, and I was interviewing people, I always found that the senior people that I interviewed were less impressive than the junior people that I interviewed, because the junior people I could train, and they could do it my way, and they could do things the way that needed to be done. And the senior people, they like to manage and they like to talk about things, but they couldn't actually do anything. So I would rather train someone to do it the way the company needed it done. Um, but and to answer your question, when you have a client and they have problems and you have to talk them through the problems, a lot of it really, I think, boils down to math. Like, you show them a spreadsheet of kind of what you're going through, you show them the math, and that's usually how you get them to make a decision that previously they didn't want to make.
Mhm.
Um, you show them examples of things that were done that made absolutely no sense and why it cost them so much money, and like, why is this guy running this department when they have no experience, and they just wasted $250,000 in something in shipping because they didn't know anything about shipping. So yeah, you just you show you develop examples. And I always have like a savings tracker when you work with us, because I like
Mhm.
to justify my fees, and I like to justify them in the first 90 days. So like, whatever you're paying us, I want to save you as much as possible to cover my fee. Otherwise, you more problems.
I know that when it comes to senior leaders, even director level or VP level leaders, I can
Mhm.
be kind of cynical, because I get a lot of emails and letters and messages from people who are in the trenches doing the work. And you just said it yourself, that the most impressive people in a business oftentimes are those people on the front lines doing the things that need to get done. And as you move your way up the
Mhm.
hierarchy, it's not always true, but let's say it's often enough true that it's more than just a, a, a one-off situation. Um, and as these leaders get further and further away from the reality of the business, I think it's not that they started off being impressive. That's what earned them the rung up the ladder. But there's a danger in moving, every one of those rungs up. Every time you move up and you move a little further away from the business, this there's this danger of eventually becoming so much of a generalist, not really being in the business of the business, that you do lose that feel that you had. You lose that sense that you had for the business. And I think it's one of the things that explains, there's every year there are multiple surveys from Gartner Group, from LinkedIn, from McKinsey, from Korn Ferry, that survey employee attitudes toward leaders. And for the last 20 years, there's been a consistent trend toward employees being less impressed with their senior leaders, um, feeling that their senior leaders are less and less engaged, less and less in tune with the business, less and less people whose judgment you can trust. And and I guess I would encourage leaders at every level, but particularly as you move into those senior leadership levels, to find a way to not lose that connection with the reality of the business. And it's not just about sitting in meetings, having people talk about the business or PowerPoint to death regarding the business. It's actually finding ways to be still in the business of the business, which isn't easy. I know, senior leaders have a lot on their minds and a lot going on, but if you drift away from the reality of the business, there's a real danger zone there, not just in, direct to consumer, but virtually any business. Have you had
Yeah, if you
leaders?
lose,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, if you lose sight of like the, DNA, like the actual business, right? And you just start managing, yeah, that's a problem. I mean, I'm definitely not perfect and I'm sure I'm in mistakes, but one thing I did not do is lose sight of the businesses that I owned because, you know, your people need someone to like drive strategy, right? Like there has to be someone that has a vision. And I have the, strange ability to be both like a visionary and an operator, which I don't recommend. Pick one or the other. But I can be both sometimes. And so kind of being that visionary and also running it, I always had to be one step ahead of everyone. And
it's a unique set of capabilities when you can be strategic and tactical, almost in the same thought, in the same moment, and flip back and forth. I describe it as learning to play or being able to play all of the piano keys on a keyboard. You have some leaders who are fantastic at the strategic aspects, but when it comes to the nitty-gritty day-to-day, they get bored, they get distracted. It's just not interesting to them because they don't see the magic in it. They see the magic in that strategy portion. And then you have other operators who only see the magic in the tactical. They don't actually have the ability to step back, to zoom out and think strategically. So what you're describing is a relatively rare capability to be able to think both feel the magic in both, and then play all the keys whenever whatever key or keys produce the right music in a particular moment. But I have to imagine you've come to recognize that set of capabilities within you is fairly unique.
Well, it's also limited. I mean, sometimes I try to do both and I'm really only good at one of them, or I'm, 90% ops and 10% visionary. It just depends on the situation. But I mean, for example, early 2000s, I created a national holiday. And so that was like pure visionary thing, right? I created National Underwear Day. And then after I decided I was going to create a national holiday, then I actually had to create it and execute it. But the whole entire thing was a visionary experience rooted like tactical stuff that it was in the first couple of years of the business. So I had to do everything, right? Fast forward the last year that I produced National Underwear Day in the middle of Times Square, I had a production company that did it. So there was a huge team of people, but they executed my vision.
All right, so I gotta ask, and I apologize for my ignorance. I didn't know there was a National Underwear Day. I don't know what that is. I mean, so what's that? What is National Underwear Day, and what is that experience?
Yeah, I mean, National Underwear Day originally was created in 2003. I was reading an article about Google and how SEO is important to businesses. And 23 years ago, most people were not talking about that. I was losing sleep over it, and I decided I needed something really big, and I needed something with a huge amount of impressions and tons of inbound links, and something that got really big. And this is before social media, so things were a little different back then. And so I created this national holiday called National Underwear Day because I wanted to be #1 in Google for the word underwear. And I knew that I needed to do something so big and so global and so different that no one that tried to compete with this could even be close to second place. And it worked. That my old company was #1 in Google for men's underwear for a very long time. I don't think they still are. And it was a really interesting learning experience. Building a 50-foot elevated runway in the middle of Times Square is probably one of the hardest things I ever had to do.
Wow.
This is not easy. But the event overall was really fun. It was the first or second week in August. We had to do it around the matinee schedule in the city, so there weren't too many tourists or people going to shows. So we always had like different requirements for when we could do it. We would hire a ton of models. We would do these runway shows. At some point, the event got so big we couldn't even do it in Times Square anymore. The city asked us to move it indoors. But I mean, it was a full-scale production, production trailers. I had to air condition part of Times Square.
Wow.
It was wild. Yeah, and again, like I was in my 20s, so this was like so fun, right? That I got to do this crazy. Yeah, it was a really good experience.
So it all started with you wanted to own the word underwear, that you wanted to be able to be like the very when someone Googles underwear, they find you, or they find what you're deploying on National Underwear Day.
My old company, yeah, my old company, and back then, a larger percentage of your traffic was from organic search. There was no social media yet, and if I had to do it all over again, I would do the same exact thing. In fact, I probably would have spent more money if I had to do it all over again.
Well, and you probably can think of like in leveraging social media, it almost seems like it's begging for social media leverage, because if you incent people to, I don't know, share their underwear, or people, there are a lot of people just looking for interesting or semi-interesting things to post online. So I imagine you could get a lot of social media traction. What
I mean, if I were to buy back my old company and buy all the IP that I don't own anymore, I would have like the largest underwear thing that ever happened on the planet. But I don't think we're going back in time. I think right now we're focused on my consulting company and fixing other brands.
So when you are working at fixing other brands, what kind of changes are you seeing in the overall consumer landscape that are making it more difficult? And I understand, you said you're an operator, so you apply a set of operating principles. But that's great. But I have to imagine that the world, even if someone perfectly applies great operating principles, the world itself is just getting harder to market to. Or am I perceiving it wrong?
Well, I think things are changing at a faster rate than they were before. So, you're not just advertising in all the same channels, every single month and just trying to optimize, right? Things are changing, behaviors changing, social media is changing, the platforms, the way you advertise, the algorithms. So, and the customer you're going after is changing, right? As new generations are, becoming your customer, the way you reach them is probably different. So, yeah, you really have to be nimble and try new things, test nonstop. And really, like, nothing is nailed down. You just have to be able and willing to react and figure it out. Yeah, it's a lot harder than it was.
I mean, I think it's, classic entrepreneurial advice is to stay close to your customer. But being close to one's customer is more complicated today than ever before, because like you said, the person that you thought was your typical customer persona a decade ago, or even 5 years ago, attitudes are shifting, behaviors are shifting, interests are shifting. And sometimes, you can have a perfectly fine product or service that is still perfectly fine. There's really nothing wrong with it. It's just people are looking for something new. Sometimes the desire is, yeah, that's fine, and I'm just looking for something new and interesting, whatever that might be. And I know
but
that can be
I think the way you talk to different generations is different. So like if you have your customer base that's, let's say they're 25 to 35, you wait 5 years, right? You have to go
Yeah.
figure out how to talk to a different generation in a different way. And maybe what worked before on whatever platforms you use, whatever your marketing mix was, it's not going to work,
Mhm.
right? This is why I'm not a marketing agency. I don't want to solve that problem. I'll help.
Yeah.
I'll help manage agency. I'll help optimize. There are a million things I can do, but I don't want to be a marketing agency. I don't want that responsibility. And I would need a completely different team and do things a different way. We can come up with crazy ideas. We can help fire your agency. If if you're selling on Amazon and you're not happy, we have a phenomenal partner we bring in. There are a lot of things we can do, but
Mhm.
I don't want the sole responsibility of marketing for for anyone.
Are you familiar at all with the Traction entrepreneurial operating system?
No,
I'm gonna say,
but explain it and maybe I am.
well,
Maybe it's just a
and
name.
and my point in even bringing it up is, uh, the book Traction. The author is Gino Wickman. He's well known for what's called EOS, Entrepreneur Operating System, and there's very little magic within the Entrepreneur Operating System, but it's become wildly successful because it is, in fact, a system. It's a proven systemic approach to running a business, and it's detailed enough where it forces a founder or business owner to make systemic decisions about their business. So I bring it up only because I think many owners, like you said at the very beginning, they start with a great idea. They get enough success so that they can grow their business, but to a large degree, they wing it. They wing it based upon what they can afford to do at the time, based upon who they hire at the time, based upon whatever is happening at the time. And you have these accumulated kind of wing it decisions that are fine until they're not fine. They're fine until they start to create an impediment to future growth. So I imagine you bring in someone like a Michael Kleinman, who has a different set of eyes. You've seen growth from a lot of different points of view. You've seen success, you've seen failure, you've experienced success and failure. That's that new set of eyes, that new set of perspectives, along with a sensitivity towards systemization. Like, okay, let's put some controls around the business to identify what's working, what's not, and why it's not working. I can see how much value that could create for some businesses that are wondering what's holding them back now. Any examples of
Yeah.
that come to mind?
About systems?
Well, or just
Specifically?
in general, how you've helped a founder who has you know, basically been winging it, or just operating on instinct, and helping them
Yeah.
understand what's working and
I mean,
not, and why it's not.
yeah, we had a client that asked us to help them with their help them manage their marketing agencies. We sat in on the meetings and I listened to everything and I looked at the reports and the whole thing. And I think within a few days, I fired the agency that was running Amazon because they just seemed completely incompetent. I didn't even want to fix it. I want to find a new one. And I brought in a new agency, which in 12 months quadrupled the Amazon revenue of that client, right? And phenomenal. And I worked very hard on that because it took it was very complicated to untangle years and years of Amazon and mistakes, but we did a phenomenal thing with Amazon. And then and then they had another marketing agency that was in charge of, Google, TikTok, Meta, and email marketing. And so we came in and we started being part of the meetings. And what I realized is that there was absolutely no direction. They think when you hire a marketing agency, that agency is like a silver bullet. Like they're just going to solve all your problems. They're going to do your marketing. But I mean, most marketing agencies are, they sell you on this dream and then they can't back it up. And if you have a business that is talking to a niche customer or anything that's not like standard, you're going to fire the agency. It's just not going to work. So we came in and we started working with the agency and basically being what the CEO should have been, which was like giving the agency direction. And and after looking at the numbers, very telling. When the agency started, they increased sales 30%. Okay. When I started managing the agency, we increased the sales by 100%. And that was because we managed the agency correctly and the client wasn't able to do it, and it was like years of neglect. And, but I don't know, 100% growth is not bad. I'll take it.
That is not bad. That is not bad. And so you take all of this, you've had exposure to such a broad range of founders, CEOs, senior leaders, people coming to you to say, hey, here's my story. Here's my set of problems. Help me to the degree that you can. If you were able to step back and give some guidance, and I know this is to some degree not fair because we're talking generally speaking. If you were to give some guidance to business owners in a general way, based upon all of the things that you've seen, what would be Michael Kleinman's guide to success, guide to continued success and growth and getting past the hump or past the plateau, whatever the plateau might be? What kind of advice might you give?
Look, I think it's cheaper to bring in an expert, like a real expert, right? It's cheaper to bring in a real expert than to try to figure it out yourself, because you're going to waste so much money learning that even if that expert is wildly expensive, it's still probably cheaper if they know what they're doing. And that's my sales pitch when I'm talking to clients. Like, we're expensive, but that's because we're not going to screw it up. And you could go spend a few $100,000 screwing it up, and then you still have to hire us to fix it. But also, you have to figure out how to remove the emotion. That's the most important thing, right? If you're the founder-run company, it's like your kid. You need to figure out a way to remove the emotion to make better decisions.
But how do you pick an expert? Because if you have this blind spot, if you have a blind spot because of what you don't know what you don't know, and the same person who picked the old marketing agency is how do you help somebody make a smarter decision to bring in a new set of eyes?
Easy answer. So in I don't know, 2018, 2017, I hired this guy who had a degree in, I think, aerospace engineering. He had worked at a very big consulting firm that you've heard of. And like, his resume was so impressive that I was afraid to talk to him, because I was like, this is one of the smartest people has ever been in my office. And he convinced me to hire him. And I hired him, and he completely screwed up the business. I mean, I almost had to shut the business down. I probably should have sued him. And what I learned from the experience is, like, just because someone is impressive and gives you a good sales pitch doesn't mean anything. You need an expert that has actually done it. Like, show me the examples of what you've done, and then dig into those examples. If you've done it before, then you're an expert. If all you're doing is theorizing about it, then you can go work at a consulting company. But I don't want to hire that person. I want the person who's actually like fixed the thing, done the thing, has the experience, but not, 40 years ago. It has to be relevant experience. Otherwise, you have another problem. So, I've dealt with people who are advisors, that are, at the time, many, many years older than me, and they had great advice, but it was completely irrelevant in the current context of running a D2C company. So you just have to, like, you follow your instincts and get someone with experience.
I'm gonna challenge that ever so slightly, because I mean, I completely agree with you, totally agree with you. But doing that is harder today than ever, because not everyone, many people can come to you to say, yeah, I've done this. I worked here. I'm responsible for the success of this company or the company before that. Here, I've got a PowerPoint deck to prove it. I've got all of the data to prove it. I've got a great story to tell. And I think when you're making the kind of decision that we're talking about, it helps to be a little paranoid, to be a bit of a detective, to make sure that, I don't know if it's learning to ask really good questions to make sure that this person is the doer or is the driver or is the person who developed the strategy, because just having a great PowerPoint deck, just having a great story, just making sense, just being able to tell a compelling vision. I've been screwed so many times by,
We all,
in
everyone
my
has.
case,
Everyone's
it's
been
mostly,
screwed, right?
and it's men and women. I mean, women are equally good at you know, playing the music so well, you feel like you want to dance to it, but in fact, they are not the doer, or they're not the decider, or they achieved a great deal of success because of the team they had around them, but now on their own, they may be less, impressive than their resume would seem. So it's not easy. I mean, you bringing someone in to quote
It's not,
fix
but
what's broken, that is a high pressure situation, I'm sure.
yeah, but you know what? Like, you have to date before you get married. So like, you don't, like, I wouldn't, if I had a business that was broken, I wouldn't bring someone in and just give them everything and say, okay, go do it. I'm going to go on
Mhm.
vacation now. Like, you still have to be there, and the founders and the CEOs that are good will be part of the process. Where things started to break down, I had a client once where we started to do so many good things that the CEO, just stopped going to meetings.
Ah,
And I was in this very uncomfortable situation where I had to run the entire company, and I had the staff coming to me saying, "You're our boss," but I'm a consultant. I'm not your boss. I'm just trying to, like, not let it fall apart.
uh-huh.
And the CEO, was on vacation and running all over the place, and he didn't work. And then, when things didn't go well, it was my fault, right? So
Mhm.
the same way that clients, or the same way that brands, right, really need to vet the consultants, I think consultants really need to vet the brands, because you could be dealing with a company that is not fixable because the person running it is a lunatic, and they might seem normal at first, and they might, you know sign your contract, but that doesn't mean that they're not a nightmare, right?
Mhm.
So I think it goes both ways. But I agree with you. There are a lot of consultants that are complete garbage. 95% of the marketing agencies out there are complete garbage. And you have to try things and make calculated
Yeah.
risks in order to vet the right people. And, like, you know what? I've been in business for 25 years. I'm sure there's a massive list of people that I have fired that have been terrible for different reasons, for agencies and whatever. It's like, and you try not to make the same mistake twice, and eventually you find, a really good team of people that you trust. And when we come in and help brands, we bring in all the resources accumulated in the last 25 years that are good. I'm not going to be right 100% of the time, but I'm going to make less mistakes than the next person. So,
Well, and I think that, and I don't want to come across as being like a total cynic, although a case can be made that I am. Um, and I guess it is buyer beware, consumer beware, buyer beware, CEO beware. Um, and and developing a little bit of self-awareness even as a CEO to say, okay, if I'm even considering bringing in someone to help me fix this, what does that say about me? What are my gaps? Where am I lacking right now? I imagine when you've like an ideal client for you would be someone who has a high degree of self-awareness and a high degree of awareness of their business, so they have a clear point of view regarding where their challenges are, as opposed to someone who's not thinking or seeing deeply, and they're hoping that you will come in and be the magic wand that will fix this without them having to change or adjust their own approach.
I mean, I've dealt with all different kinds of clients from, I mean, I've dealt with startups that had no money. I've dealt with startups that have lots of money. I've dealt with billionaires that operate at a totally different, level than logic would dictate. I've dealt with everything in between, right? You just need someone who's dedicated to the business. That, like, as long as the founder, like, I want to know that whoever hires us is actually working in the business. I don't care if they're doing it full time. I just care that they're involved enough that I can be useful and I can actually fix the thing, where it's not hard to get a hold of them and they're not totally out of touch with reality. Like, they just have to be dedicated to it. It's, you can say you want to fix it, but that doesn't mean you want to fix it. So, like, they really to want to fix it, and they have to prove that they're, getting better. The nightmare client is when you go in there and there are no systems in place and they have 50,000 emails in their inbox. Most are on red, and like, they're just, all they do is fight fires all day long. That's the nightmare client. I've tried to tame those people. It's not possible. It's like dealing with an addict. You can't, like, no matter what you do, you can't do it. So it's, I have a lot of war stories.
So, Michael, this is fantastic, and I would imagine any business leader, owner, founder watching this, listening to this, if you've got a challenge that's been festering and you haven't been sure what to do about it, I imagine you would be more than willing to have an initial conversation just to talk through what's not perfect yet, or what's not working the way you think it should be working, and just have that exploratory dialogue, and then from there determine whether or not something deeper or would make sense or not.
Yeah, always happy to chat with founders and C-suite people at different size companies. If you have a challenge you just haven't been able to figure out, the business is stuck, and you feel like you can't do it yourself, you can't do it with the team you have, or you just can't do it fast enough. Sometimes people bring us in because they're about to raise money and they need to fix things really quickly, right? So happy to chat with people. We're always interested in interesting projects with nice people to work with. So definitely contact.
Or I imagine if you're not a nice person to work with, there's going to be a premium to be paid or a tax to be paid, because I'm sure you don't work only with really nice people. You probably can work with some abrasive folks. Just recognizing though that there's a cost to that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure people say all sorts of things about me being abrasive, but I want to work with people that are respectful. Let me rephrase that. I want to work with people that are respectful of what we're doing and really want some sort of change, and they need help, and and it's a collaborative thing, and it's a long-term thing. Like, we don't come in for 2 weeks to do things, we want to help you over the long term, because that's probably what the business needs, and we'd be happy to chat.
So I'll make sure we include your contact information in the show notes. If you're interested in reaching out to Michael, definitely do that. I want to be respectful of your time. This has been great. I appreciate this, and we will we'll reach out to you to let you know exactly when this will be published, Michael. But any final words you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn if you look for Michael Kleinman, and you can also go to our website, which is my initials, mkinc.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.